Are we live?
You're live.
Okay, fabulous. Hello. Welcome to my guests and to our viewers. This is a new feature of the OU Historical Journal that we're experimenting with this year, which is conversations with some of our authors and the professors that they worked with to produce the wonderful works of undergraduate scholarship that we are publishing. My name is Rayphil Folsom. You can call me Rafe or Rafey. I would hope you do. People here have a little bit of difficulty calling professors by their first names, but anyway, it is what it is. I am joined this afternoon by Professor Jim Kane, who is a professor of modern Latin American history at OU. He is the author of many essays and articles and a wonderful book entitled The Fourth Enemy, Journalism and Power in the Making of Peronist Argentina, 1930 to 1955. Welcome. I'm also joined by Arthur Dixon, one of our most distinguished undergraduates, author of many outstanding undergraduate papers, one of which we published last year on Hugo Falcundus, an important figure in medieval Sicily. I encourage you to look at the OU Historical Journal to have a look at that extraordinary paper. And this year, he is the author of another paper that he worked on with Jim entitled Heterogeneous Exiliados, Permanent Exilios, and Imagined Patrias, Modern Exile from Argentina and Chile. Welcome to you both, and congratulations on your having won the Griswold Prize for Excellence in Undergraduate Historical Scholarship this year.
Well deserved.
Well deserved. You kind of ran away with the competition. It was an extraordinarily good year for submissions. We had, I think, 45 submissions, and after a rigorous and agonizing process of evaluating those papers, our editorial board came to the conclusion that this is the one that we wanted to honor with the prize, along with 5 others, and we'll be hopefully having some interviews with the authors of those papers too. So Jim, I was hoping that you would start us off and talk a little bit about the class in which this paper was written, some of your goals in the teaching of that class, your methods, your ways of drawing such extraordinary work from your students. Please.
Well, the class was one of the history colloquium that we teach as sort of stepping stone to the capstone. It's designed to concentrate on helping student writing as well as expanding student research methods and allowing them to explore topics that they want to explore. The topic that I gave for the course was Latin American experiences of modernity, which is designed to be basically as broad as possible, while still giving some sense of coherence. And the problem that I normally have in classes with that focus on undergraduate research is the need to have to set the course topics broad enough so that students can work with sources in English. It's increasingly common. It's still not as common as I'd like it to be, but it's increasingly common to have students like Arthur who are perfectly capable of doing research in Spanish. But the courses still need to be broad enough that it would allow students to do research in English. So we started out the class with some general theoretical readings by historians, sociologists, anthropologists on defining modernity, characteristics of modernity, whether it was a useful category or not. And then we had a set of common readings for about 7 or 8 weeks, drawn from 19th and 20th century scholars working on 19th and 20th century Latin America, and then focusing on some of the questions that were raised earlier in the more theoretical pieces.
If I may, I'm curious, which of those books worked best for teaching, which were most successful, which are the ones that maybe next time you won't assign? I often experiment with new readings unsuccessfully, and I'm curious to know about the ones that you really thought were fabulous, produced excellent conversations.
We went with all articles.
Oh.
All articles, and I don't know that I'm the person to say what worked best. I know what some of the work that I thought was the more important. But maybe Arthur would be.
Yeah, well, I
better,
mean, I think that the approach with articles in that way is, I don't know, kind of original for me. I haven't really worked in a history class in that way until taking your classes, so it's always a kind of a nice change from having big, thick tomes to work your way through over the course of the semester. But I think it worked very well, largely because, as we always do in your courses, we started off with some kind of, as you were saying, quite broad theoretical papers that more than anything kind of provided a sort of a language and a vocabulary that you could then use to talk about sort of later questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we essentially sort of set up a schema kind of in the first couple of weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and then went kind of place by place and time by time,
Mm-hmm.
sort of, yeah, dotting around and talking about more specific phenomena that you could work back into a structure that was already established.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that my paper was very much a product of that way of thinking.
And one of the things that I think it's important for people who may not be majors to hear a little bit about is some of the goals of the colloquium, in the sense that I think a lot of people come to history in college thinking that it's a body of facts that one must master, rather than a kind of an intellectual process that one has to kind of go through. And the notion of the wide open nature of debate, and the kind of the complexities and the joys of working with primary sources. Maybe either of you could speak to that. I know you've been doing a lot of this throughout your career. You've dealt with both primary and secondary work, and very successfully so. But for maybe somebody who's thinking about being a history major, could you maybe talk a little bit about what it was like for you to kind of engage with these primary sources, engage with the debates that people have had about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it would be interesting to note from someone, from the perspective of someone who's not currently doing history,
Mm-hmm.
how interpretive it is, and
Mhm.
how often how little time you're spending kind of setting up facts, and how much time you're spending just sort of really deeply considering them.
Mm-hmm.
In the reading that I did for this paper, there weren't any kind of major big events
Mhm.
that I didn't already have some idea of coming into it. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? So the vast majority of the research was kind of understanding different perspectives, and in this case as well, looking a great deal into sort of what people had said about these events, sort of personal experiences of historical events,
Mm-hmm.
was also very important. So yeah, it's very it is extremely interpretive, much more interpretive than kind of the mechanical, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Jim, if you could talk a little bit about how you transitioned from this early period of looking at theoretical approaches, then looking at kind of fine-grained research articles, to getting students into the research itself. I think either one of you should, or both of you should talk a little bit about that. But maybe you first, Jim.
Well, one of the things that I tend to do, and that I did with this particular course, is I have, in our initial set of theoretical readings, I try to select readings where the authors have some dispute.
Mm.
So we get some sense of the outlines of a debate,
Mm-hmm.
as well as a common language, sort of analytical language, and then we sort of made the transition to looking at things like, so if Garcia Canclini in the piece that we read by him emphasized the increasing importance of reason within modernity as one of the fundamental aspects of modernity, is the expansion of reason to all of life, all of experience. Then we look at, when we read parts of Sarmiento's Facundo, how does Sarmiento, where do we see Sarmiento emphasize reason? Where do we see his criticism of irrationality? In scholarly articles, for example, on the reconstruction of the city of Valparaiso after the, was it 1902 earthquake, 1906 earthquake? How did sort of thoughts of urban planning, the sort of rationalization of urban planning, conflict with material interests of property owners, etc.?
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about this? How do you kind of locate these primary sources, find things that you were intrigued by, that were rich enough for you to kind of analyze in ways that you thought were
Sure. I mean,
worth it?
in my case, writing about exile was something that I'd wanted to do for quite a while. I'd kind of come at that in many ways from literature more than anything, because I study Spanish as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a history and Spanish major, and so studying modern Spanish literature inevitably, or Latin American literature, inevitably you'll come across a number of authors who had experiences of exile, and authors for whom that experience was kind of a definitive part of their work. So I sort of already had a sense that I wanted to write something about that, and then sort of, again, it was a matter of considering that in this kind of overarching context of modernity a little bit, and then being able to look into both primary sources and secondary sources. The primary sources I mostly used, as I said, kind of testimonials of exiles, people that had lived through these experiences, and thinking about the sort of individual experience on one hand from sort of statements that people had made, and also sort of in a wider sense the collective experience of these vast numbers of people to whom this happened, and then thinking about how both of those could kind of connect back to a more general theoretical idea of sort of what is modernity, how did modernity affect sort of affect each of these spheres.
And it fit very nicely because within our common readings, among the primary sources within our common readings, we have several figures who were, in fact most of them, wrote their works that we read while in exile. So Simón Bolívar in the Jamaica Letter, Sarmiento and Facundo, José Martí in Our America. I mean, these were our sort of common primary text, primary sources that we read together, and they all happen to be, and I guess it's not happened to be, there's something behind this, written in exile. So this was a perfect topic to go along with it.
Yeah, there's a lot that I admired about this paper, just rereading it this morning. And just to give a little bit of background, just correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it seems to me that the basic structure of the paper was comparing two experiences of exile: the Chilean experience of exile after the Pinochet coup, and the Argentine experience after the over a long period involving the Dirty War. And there's some interesting things about this, and I think that one thing that it'll be important for people who are just getting into history to think about: this is enormously sophisticated, advanced work that merits publication and should be elaborated at greater length, just for the good of the profession. But there are entrees into this that I think beginners need to know about. And there's one thing I was struck by is there's a book about writing that I often use and reread over and over again, called A Writer's Companion by Richard Marius, and he says that one of the most fertile topics that historians use is actually quite simple, and it dates back to Aristotle, and it's compare and contrast. What are the similarities between these two objects of study? What are the differences between them? And it sounds like something that a fourth grader could master, but when you apply it to much larger, more complex phenomena, it still yields incredibly useful results. And by sort of saying comparing and contrast, you've got the first paper in which you say, these are tremendously heterogeneous groups with individual experience that varied widely and wildly over time and space. But at the same time, there are these kind of uniting themes that you find throughout this experience. And I think the putting those uniting themes under the rubric of modernity was very, very effective. And I just want to emphasize that if you're a beginning major, this tremendously advanced and sophisticated work flows from principles that I think a beginner can definitely use productively. And I don't know if you had that in mind when you were conceiving the paper, but it turned out to be a very successful way of structuring.
Yeah, I think the structure of the paper is very much indicative of that. Partly because, you see it in the title, the fact that it's called Heterogeneous Exiliados at the start. Really, a large part of the first sort of section of the paper is just sort of saying how hard it's going to be to do what I want to do in the rest of the paper, right? So sort of how hard it's going to be to intelligently talk about these two very big, very complex things in a paper, kind of.
Which would just be, it would be just as hard, but in a different way if it were a book.
Yeah. Right, yeah, exactly, yeah. It would be as hard on a larger scale, I guess.
Indeed.
So, and then in the rest of the paper I try to, like we're saying, sort of use these schemas, these ideas of modernity to sort of redeem these two very big, very confusing movements, and to try to, as you say, establish connections between them and do a more intelligent compare and contrast, if that's even possible. That's the idea.
It's very much possible because you did it. Outstanding work. I'm just curious to get a little bit into more into the content of this paper. I think this is a question for both of you. What is modernity and why should we care about it?
Do you want to take that one?
Well, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the sort of key aspects of modernity as we move from the late 18th century into the 20th century is the expansion of the political sphere. So the expansion of systematic participation in politics as it expands to greater and greater portions of the population. And the way that Arthur sort of captures that is in the way that exile from the late colonial period, early and during the Wars of Independence, exile really was a phenomenon designed to target very specific people, and these were leaders of specific political movements. Right? So you have Simón Bolívar is exiled, Domingo Sarmiento is exiled, and with the expansion of the rights of political participation, which is uneven yet is clearly expanding to greater and greater sectors of society through the course of the 19th century and well into the 20th century as well. What you get is, by the 20s and 30s, increasingly it's no longer simply the leadership of political movements that are exiled, but you also have sort of rank and file members of groups like the APRA, Party of Peru, who are sent into exile. And then this sort of culminates with the phenomena that Arthur examines, which is the mass exiles from Chile and Argentina, in the case of Argentina from 66 on, and Chile 73 on. The fact that these are very large-scale exiles is indicative of the degree to which the sense of the right to participate in politics has expanded enormously.
Brilliantly explained. Do you have anything to add? Or I'm sure you've got a lot to add.
I mean, no, that's exactly right. But I think that, I don't know, one thing that interested and worried me over the course of researching and writing this paper is how sort of a current of modernity that seems so sort of overwhelmingly positive when you just first mention it, kind of the expansion of democratic participation in government, this sense that when it goes wrong, as in the sort of when a military regime is going to be established one way or another, then it means that it goes very, very wrong. And then, I don't know, it's kind of, I don't know, that's a striking element of it. Exactly.
It reminds me a little bit, once I was, when I was an undergraduate, I spent some of a summer in Turkey, and I was really stunned by the degree to which Turks participate in politics, and they're vigorously involved, and they care about it, and they're passionate about it, at a level that I did not, or haven't often experienced in the United States. And I spoke with this Turkish guy about it. I said, it's really wonderful that the democracy really reaches as far into people's lives as it does. And the guy said, I hate it. I can't stand it. I'm tired of politics. I don't want to be involved in it. And I think that's an experience of modernity that sounds a little bit like the ones that you guys have been kind of tackling in this Latin American context.
So Oscar Wilde had said, I love socialism, except I would hate all the meetings.
Oh, goodness, meetings. Well, some meetings are more enjoyable than others, and this one definitely has been for me as well. And we could go on for a long, long time about this, and I hope we do. Let me just see how much time it's 20 minutes. But I think that this has been an incredibly fruitful collaboration. I look forward to seeing more of your work as your career progresses. You're graduating in December, I believe, so we've got a little bit more Arthur Dixon to look forward to, which is terrific. And thank you both for joining me, and let's hope this works as a presentation. I haven't been cut out of the picture the entire time. Fingers crossed. But anyway, this has been a wonderful experiment, and thanks so much for being my guinea pigs, if you will. Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Great. All right, let's go to... Stop.